for my phone call, and I can't type. I'll be back in a moment.
Now he is here and can do all these types of things. If you feel the need to go and lay down, Patsy, do feel free.
Oh, that's kind of you. I will remain upright if possible.
Ooh.
Patsy still has a quite a bit of flu at the moment, so
Some sort of bug anyway.
hmm.
But yeah. Um, so we I'm sorry we're rather few in our numbers, but of course everyone's doing Christmas shopping, I dare say, and of course also we weren't sure which of our two speakers we were going to have. So I will leave yeah, you two do the introductions, right?
Just a minute.
There you are. As my usual statement is, I shall wait a few more minutes to see if we get anybody else, and then if you're sitting comfortably, I shall begin. Do we all remember where that comes from?
Yeah, listen with mother.
Daphne Oxenford, her name was.
That was the lady. Yeah, but a lovely name, Daphne Oxenford. Sounds like some middle class English lady, doesn't it?
But she understood about children needing to not wriggle around. So when you're sitting comfortably,
Yeah.
Hey, you know,
Someone called Joyce Grenville used to do a take on her, didn't she?
Oh, yeah.
Radio, which was
Nice.
absolutely hilarious.
yeah.
yeah.
She was wonderful. Children.
Yeah.
There was this child, Charles. I think it was Charles. Don't do that, dear. And you never knew exactly what Charles was doing.
It was just wonderful. It was just wonderful.
Sorry, Patsy, but I think it was George.
Oh right, yes, I knew there was somebody
George,
though
don't do that.
But let me just say, please, I have got a list as long as a yard to do, so I'm going to listen in and probably disappear halfway through or something.
Oh, that's
Ooh.
yeah.
Well, what can I say? Apart from, right, I shall begin. Dear friends, this is a talk that I have been planning for a little while. So if it is a little disjointed, please bear with me. But it is one which I feel quite strongly about. I first read about it in a magazine called Farsight, and I'm going to quote unmercifully from some of it. So, although the internet access might seem like more of a luxury than a fundamental human right, such as the right to work, the right for free expression, or the right to receive an education, these and other rights are increasingly dependent upon citizens being able to communicate and seek out information online. What would it take to provide access to all? The COVID pandemic made one thing very clear. For many people restricted to their homes and an internet connection for schooling, work, medical help, commerce, and communication, starting to look more like a necessity than a luxury. Indeed, the pandemic served to further deepen the digital divide in the increasing digital society. In the future, as all corners of the society become even more dependent on connectivity, the unconnected might feel increasingly digital disfranchised. But what if the internet access was established as a right, much as access to water, food, or healthcare is today? This was the aim of a resolution passed by the United Nations in 2016, although an unbinding one. It was a step towards a broad recognition that many of the things that we already consider a right today are becoming more and more dependent on internet use. Equal access to work is one example. This right was codified in the International Convention on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights in a pre-internet age. Today, with many jobs posted only existing online, applying for work most often requires internet access. The internet is a primary thing nowadays that we use for communication with others. That device at your work due to COVID meant that people found they could work from home for a few days of the week instead of just going to the office. People, one can see that with people whose job office was in London, and that meant the inevitable train trip to the train and struggling through the overground and the tube to get to your place of work, and then the shops nearby, the coffee shops where you brought your latte or whatever and your lunchtime sandwich. A number of those, after COVID finished, started to go out of business, basically because people weren't coming to buy the food and the coffee. They were working from home a lot of the time. Therefore, as you can see, the internet was very, very big in that. And the amusing sale of more ergodynamic chairs for you to sit at your kitchen table and do your work. The only other thing which happened there was, what a lot of people found was, their electricity bill went up. And you go, yes, of course it would, because you're working from home. That amused me greatly. COVID only strengthened that argument because it exposed a shocking disparity between those who have and those who don't have access. What of, say, the relationship between internet access and the right to education? As COVID-era remote schooling highlighted, this showed the stark difference between those who had internet and computers at their homes and those who were just using the internet on their phones. You saw it also in the fact of children from the normal basic schools being given packs of schoolwork to do because that a lot of them didn't have strong internet at home. If you were kind of wealthy in that type of thing, you had your computer, you had a connection to the school, so the school was able to continue onwards with basic education because everybody turned those the wealthy turned up online, and it was just another day at school, basically. You had break time, of course, in your house and done things like that. Now, and then called the certain lack of access may be a problem in fulfilling fundamental rights. Access being removed is another. A report by the UN Human Rights Act, published in summer 2022, stresses the negative ramifications it had when governments switched off the internet. If you are in a regime where you had the internet and the government decided, we don't want you listening to that. We don't want you to hear these types of things. We don't want you to tell the rest of the world what is happening in their country. The internet was bing, just like that. And then I think the way we value the internet today is that we are a democratic society and we have that type of thing. But there are lots of the internet which are really pretty terrible. We have seen that in the in COVID, where you had someone who can come up on the internet and say, don't have COVID injections, because they will inject a chip into you and you will be controlled by the government. Total horse feathers, as some American once said, but hey, it's that type of thing. In recent response to a recent growing protest in the country, the Iranian government began to disable the internet in parts of Tehran, and additionally to shut off access to certain social media and messaging platforms. But Iran is not alone. 74 countries enacted 931 shutdowns between 2016 and 2021, often as a massive economic cost nationally, with a knock-on effect of internationally participating in the dialogue between countries, highlighting political tension, rarely with no real reason given. That all this matters is arguably only the case if a lack of internet access really does limit people in exercising their fundamental rights. And the first of a series of internet depravity studies which seem to suggest that it does. University of Haifa has conducted control experiments in which participants, the education and theological professions, were challenged to complete two tasks, either with or without the aid of the internet. The first task was to find out which members of the Israel parliament submitted a particular bill. The second was to express themselves regarding political topics to a wider audience. One group was allowed to use all available resources, including the internet. The other group was denied internet access. Unsurprisingly, 89% of the subjects of the first group completed the task, but only 12% of the internet deprived managed to do so. That just shows how big it has become to all of us in that respect. But this is a thing I found surprising. It is not that much better in the developed world. Half of the US population is not using the internet at broadband speeds, either because of the lack of local infrastructure or because the service was too expensive or because they lacked the skills. 5% had no internet access at all. That is in America, which is supposed to be the more go ahead and biggest internet users in a whistlot. Small wonder that the last decade has seen some countries declare the internet access a right. One of my favorite countries, this is Finland and Mexico, being among the nations that have taken the first steps to make national coverage a reality. Surprising, Mexico being one of them, that I thought was, hang on, aren't they supposed to be? America tells us that Mexico is, and it's doing that. Among ideas explored have been the repurposing of community centres or libraries as free internet access hubs and offering subsidies to citizens to buy access at home. The governments were subsidizing the people who said, that who couldn't afford it. I think that's good. I think that's a start. Something that England could consider doing. If you're a poor person in need of the access to apply for jobs, to study, and to things like that, then should we be saying to them, no, you can't do that, you have to pay for it? As I've said earlier, if it is a access which we want, which we think should be for everybody, then the poor are more likely to need to use that than the wealthy who can afford to pay and use it. If we're saying, education is good, then the internet education should be a right to every English citizen, I believe. But yeah. Right. Oh yes, and there was something which I thought, there's a thought. If you don't live in a major city where, cabling is, de rigueur, so what happens if you live in a village? What happens if the cabling has not reached you yet and is not likely to say 2030 or something? Where do we go from there? What are we saying? That it's okay if you're in the city, you can have this kind of free internet type of thing because you're all cabled up. What happens if you are in the countryside, in the villages, which England has, and substantially still a large amount of villages which know about internet, then telephone connection is sometimes pretty naff when you come to that, you know. And when, as we as a city, when was the last time you couldn't get a telephone signal in your property? I would say quite a long time ago, friends. You know, so if we're still in the age of haves and have nots, you know, where should we start on this type of thing? You know, we, instead of having internet for all as a free thing, shouldn't we start with a telephone connection for all? Which might be start somewhere, but that's me going off on a tangent. So yeah. So also the digital divide will be hampered by taking a binary view, access or no access, rather than seeing the situation as more of a graduations of access divide, requiring a suitable multifaceted response according to factors like language, education, income, and available technology. As I said just now, you know, is something along those lines. But of course, that is not the only barrier to ensuring the right to internet access is made a reality. Reframing internet access is a need rather than a want. Will inevitably entail more government regulations, even if in the US, at least 17 states have laws prohibiting broadband being treated as a public utility. 17 states say no. Service providers and other companies that profit directly from the internet might also be expected to lobby hard to minimize government interference. And further down the line, if internet access does come to be seen as a right, one might, in time, expect the contents of the internet to face review too. We could try to force internet providers to spend some part of their profits on expanding the service or looking to tax the likes of Google and Facebook to expand to such a business that relies on the internet. And I would actually add what is it, X, along with that group as well now. The internet has been a kind of a wild west so far, with many tech companies like Google and Facebook only now starting to recognize the problems with their behaviors. But some kind of legal requirement on these players to act seems to be the way we are going now. I don't think most people even think about whether we should be helping those who don't have internet access here or abroad to get it. I think people still tend to think of the internet access as a luxury, as something to watch Netflix on. Yes, they may be what most people use internet for, but rights are socially guarantees against standard threats in the way that you might have an entitlement to police protection or from being assaulted, for example. But if we're going to make internet access a right, that needs to come with better protections and some form of minimal entitlements to support those who need it most. As I say, that I was that's my basic things which I had set out. I was going to start putting a bit more flesh over those, but circumstances prevailed, and you have my basic thoughts on the subject. So, if anybody would like to make comments, questions, or say, Ray, you're talking absolute twaddle, please feel free to do. Angela.
I think, well, there's enough food for thought there to take us well into 2025, I think. I think whatever access there is, and there is the deep state, the paramount thing, it seems to me, is always how do we as adults protect children from harm? Because the whole issue of grooming, what's happened, you know, the case that came to court with two innocent teenagers being murdered because of misinformation. I mean, I think I would still say education is so important. But you've raised so many really vital issues. Thank you.
It's a kind of nearly a jumping off point. Where do we go? What is the thing? So the most you're talking about then about children and all that lot. I was told of a really horrendous case of a small boy who was looking at the internet, and he came across this young lady who started to chat to him and say, "How are you?" and all this lot. And so they chatted together, and she showed her wherewithal, and he showed his wherewithal, only to find out later that they were demanding more and more, to the sense that he was then showing himself completely without his wherewithal. And that was a kind of nearly a blackmail thing. If you don't do what I say, I'll send the photographs to your schoolmates and things like this. And so, yes, that is very powerful. We need to actually protect children against such absolute shitbags. David?
You have the least idea how you would do that.
No.
I was going to ask that.
And yet you are arguing that the internet should be made a universal right when it's completely unprotected and completely unguarded. So I should. So when the internet came out, I had been living in Silicon Valley for some time. And there's a joke in Silicon Valley that a person who's not connected to the internet is a person of no account, meaning you haven't got an internet account. It was a joke, but it made sense out there. And I set to teaching courses on the internet when I got back from America. But I think one ought to be realistic and understand both sides. There's a wonderful story, lovely story, this very eminent Indian barrister who's just a wonderful, erudite man. And he arrived a little bit late in court, bit flustered, gets up, but delivers the most incredible indictment of the defendant, right? Goes absolutely through every single possible reason why the defendant should be sent down, and then says, and that is the reason why I would argue that the defendant should receive maximum sentence. And then he sits down, and his colleague says, "Excuse me, but you're the barrister for the defence in this case, not prosecution." And he gets up and he says, "Your Honour, what I have just said are all the arguments that my honourable colleague will use to prosecute the defendant. I am now going to refute every single one of them and explain exactly why the defendant should be set free immediately." And of course proceeded to do it. It's a story, of course, but the point is that somebody with a really good mind can argue equally well for one side or the other. And
yes, David, let me kind of refute a bit to the argument which you had just then. Are you saying then that because we cannot find these protections at the moment, we should close down the internet completely and not use it because it is there are people around who will do nasty things?
Well, just because I might argue for one side of something doesn't mean that, of course, I'm not. I think you probably heard me when I said that I came back from America and started teaching courses about the internet. But clearly, I'm not arguing that it should be shut down, and it's a sort of trivial argument to put in my mouth the idea that I'm arguing it should be shut down. I'm arguing that we should have an intelligent society that thinks through everything properly. You said in Finland, you gave Finland as an example. Do you know of the internet being a universal right in America? Do you know what they have made illegal in Finland instead of the internet?
Go on then.
Homelessness.
Yeah.
Right. So they have people whose job it is to look around and find people living on the streets and offer them housing and make sure they get it with support of all kinds, right? So that is an example of systemic integrated thinking in a society, which we are not getting at the moment with the internet. You have
a country.
Well, no, it's not go for it, because just to argue one way for something, one way or the other, doesn't going to happen. Absolutely, it's just waffling in a bar. What the internet has done is give children massive numbers of children, nearly all children, access to pornography from an early age, right? And in America, one of the best jobs, easiest jobs to get in Africa is to become a moderator on social media, right? Because social media are required to demonstrate that they are doing things to not permit all sorts of horrible stuff appearing on the internet. And they can't stop stuff being posted. They can only delete it once it's there. Because anybody can post anything. I can upload a picture of anything anywhere. Please allow me to finish. Yes? Thank you. And in Africa now, there are record levels. These jobs are being outsourced to Africa. The people doing the jobs are being paid appallingly low wages, and they are reporting extraordinary levels of PTSD and mental health problems, because what they are seeing is thousands upon thousands all day of examples of sexual perversion, extreme violence, and all the rest of it, which they have to clean out of these social media sites. So the internet, and it is my experience of if I may be so bold, of moderating this group, is that older people, by and large, haven't got a clue how to use the internet properly. They're just about able to use a few things that they do regularly, but they're not able to use the internet properly. And it is no way to guarantee your access to housing, health, wealth, well-being, mental health, any of these things. The internet is an absolute mess at the moment, I would argue. I could quite happily get up and argue the opposite, but I would not argue the opposite without arguing for far higher levels of intelligent supervision. I was just noting examples. So, for instance, and this is important, you can go on the internet in America. In the old days, you might go into a pub and argue that the earth is flat, right? Now, and you would be just laughed at by your mates. They'd tell you an idiot, go home and get your head together. The earth's obviously round. Ask any airline pilot. Now, there are whole cults around flat earth, and they are encouraged in America because keeping people thick is one way of keeping bad government in power. And it's promoted by the religious right in America. And it's just a part of keeping people dumb and stupid. The internet doesn't give access to information. One piece of good news, which you won't know about, is that it doesn't matter where you are in the world now. You don't need wired access to the internet. You can have radio access to the internet, and not just ordinary radio access to the internet, but Apple are introducing a feature whereby you can send text messages in an area with no internet access at all, because they will be relayed by satellite. So if you are out walking in an area with no internet cover whatsoever, you can get access to to emergency services in ways that was never before possible. But these are isolated instances, and we have to do things in our society in a far more integrated way than we're doing at the moment. I'm just arguing for one piece of technology or another, free access to electric transport. It isn't going to work, in my view. Sorry, I will now let you come back. I wanted to finish my point before I gave the microphone back to you. Thank you.
If you remember, part of this, I said that the internet is still rather like the old Wild West. It is unregulated. We can see that in places like Musk's statements upon his, he is an extraordinarily wealthy man who, having got X, is now making it I would say, a cesspool of the sort of people who now are on it. And yes, we need to have a lot more regulation, especially when it comes to child porn or any porn, come to that. But I don't have the answers to that. And I think very, very few people do, because it is so prevalent, because there are a lot of people, a lot of very, very horrible people out there who will do not only pornography, but, other, what I would class as batshit type of statements which are put out. And yes, this is called, sadly, this is called sometimes democracy, being able to say what you want. But no, there are rules like today. We don't, racism, sexism, misogyny is now not part of our what we say to each other in the local commas, but that is still allowed upon the internet. Yes, it has to change, but how it can change, where those rules, where those things come from, no, I don't know. But I do know that the internet is somewhere where you people need it, because a lot of the councils and a lot of the NHS and a lot of the doctors' surgeries and appointments and all this lot are being collected upon the internet for people to use. And that is why I think sometimes that is needed. It showed at COVID how much education is disparate. Private schools were allowed to continue that. Normal education wasn't for quite a lot of children and adults. So, yes, it needs to change. I don't know the answers. I am just putting forward arguments which I have seen, which I have heard about, which are, I think, good.
I'm definitely not feeling at my brainiest today, and so I suspect my comment is going to be a bit stupid, but I'm asking in a spirit of genuine inquiry. Can somebody explain to me I mean, I'm trying to sort out, for me, two concepts. One, we work out a way in which internet access can be free. And two, we work out a way in which internet access can be safe. And are these two things necessarily separate? Can those two things be brought together? As I say, I do apologise for rather woolly thinking. But you get my drift? I'm asking, Ray, David?
I can give you a good example, which is that in some countries, the internet has been made free by Facebook. But what you're doing is you're actually accessing the internet then through Facebook. So it has become a complete tool of the social media. And just because councils are putting their services online, as everybody knows who has ever tried to use online services, things that used to be simple, like going into a bank and opening an account or having an error fixed, become almost completely opaque and unnavigable to even for intelligent people who are used to the internet. But what about people who have learning difficulties, or who are disabled, or who are from foreign cultures? It's to me iniquitous that we allow whole sectors of society, and whatever Musk is doing with X, what he has actually definitely done is in the last round of elections when Trump was elected, and when in this country we voted for Brexit, we discovered that there had been massive manipulation of the social media. The phrase Cambridge Analytica comes up. Vast amounts of highly targeted emails were directed at the people who were seen to be most likely to vote Brexit, and the Remainers didn't even know it was happening. It was completely obscure. And this time round, Musk has basically bought Trump the presidency on the back of which he gets incredible. He turns Trump around on electric cars, to which Trump was opposed. He gets Trump's backing for his Mars mission and all the rest of it. So the internet is being used as the most efficient tool ever created by humanity for the concentration of wealth and the amongst the super rich and the extraction of wealth from everybody else. And to say, oh, but I've got some really good arguments why the internet's a good thing. Yes, of course it's a good thing. And in most cases, you do get the internet for free because you're paying less for your phone now, if you get a cheap phone, than you were paying for your phone 10 years ago. And it includes the internet automatically. So the internet is not just free at the moment, it's negative price, but it's you get it with all kinds of negative impact. And I would say, you know, if you had to do one thing, it would be stop anybody under the age of 12 having any access to the internet at all. Full stop.
Angela?
Next.
Angela?
Well, yeah. January the 6th, 2025 is a very worrying time for the United Kingdom, because what Musk is threatening to do is give one Nigel Farage huge sums of money to try and ensure that in the UK's next election, one Nigel Adolf Hitler Farage comes to power. I think, you know, and I agree. I think I'm agreeing with you, David, but I could probably argue, you know, from here to January the 6th about how complex. I agree with you. It's complex, the issues. It can be a tool for enlightenment, morality, and good. But if Nigel Farage gets more, I call him Nigel Adolf Hitler Farage to make clear where I am with him. You know, if in the next election, thanks to Musk giving large sums of money to this odious man, we are very vulnerable to becoming what I grew up with, Adolf Hitler, the fear of Adolf Hitler. Sorry, that's me pouring out emotions, but I think, David, you are raising really vital questions.
There's this I knew would produce different questions of morality, of honesty, of complex situations. But going into the 21st century, we cannot hide underneath the bed and think that it's not happening. There's nothing to do with me. All these things that are happening are not my fault. I can't do anything about them, so I'm just going to pull the duvet up over my head and say, a plague on all your houses, type of thing. We have to, not we, but I suppose the government, which is part of we, have to go forward on these things which are happening to us globally, and find ways forward. On either case, it's not going away, folks. It's going to be there, and we, as I say, a human species, have to find our way through the thicket to what is there. We can't turn away from it. We can't go back to what some writer said, the blue remembered hills of youth. Because Yeah, they're not there anymore. There are moral, ethical, and other problems facing us. It's how we face them, how we go forward, is a mark of their humanity.
Or lack of it.
Touche.
How much humanity in Sudan, how much humanity in Syria, how much humanity in Ukraine and Russia, and to what extent are these conflicts being fed by the controlled media? The point is that whatever media we're using, and this goes way back, way before the internet, the media were absolutely an instrument of state control ever since the invention of print. You know, there were tight controls over what could and couldn't be printed right from the start, and that influence has become subtler and subtler down the ages, to the point where um, we can see a sort of, do we want this or do we want this? And we are set arguing with each other, and that actually just the more we are in conflict, the happier the people who are actually controlling society are, because the concern of the public is deflected from the people who are controlling and benefiting from the misery. So you know, this is I'm not a counter example to what you're saying. I'm certainly I use the internet all the time. I think it would have been very difficult for us to navigate COVID with the internet, without the internet, I mean. But I think it would have been quite difficult for us to have gotten into that pickle. The uh, the King George, whose first name was David, actually, his best friend was Lord Louis Mountbatten, and he said, "I can think of no one I would rather have with me in a scrape than Louis." And then he said, "And I can't think of anyone more likely to get me into a scrape either." You know, it's despite progress and technology, suffering continues. And arguing for or against any one particular technology um, is not the best argument for us becoming more human, more empathic, more caring, more loving to each other and to the environment. And that comes, you know, the core message of the founders of all the great religions is around loving one another, caring for one another, being united with our um, with you know, being responsible for ourselves and for nature. And so, you know, it's a little bit of a distraction to argue for or against a particular technology when we should perhaps be arguing for restoring the core principles of the inspiration of all the great religious movements, including the Quakers. I don't think you would. I'm not sure you'd find George Fox arguing for the internet in the present time. So much as standing up and observing that most people are behaving without any semblance of connection to the divine and to, a sound moral base.
I think quite interesting, though, isn't it? If we compare access to the internet with ability to read. I mean, I'm thinking back, to the time when my parents were growing up, at the end of the 19th century, and it was a triumph to be able to read. Not by any means every child could read. And then you could, of course, dispute to what extent it was a good thing that they could read, because look at all the stuff that they would read, given free range, which often, of course, they didn't have, because even if they could get access to the library, it didn't follow that everything was in the library. Nevertheless, it was a very big thing. My father's education was in what it was called the Mechanics Institute. The most precious thing was their access to books. And his most precious asset was he'd learnt to read and to do excellent figure work at school, which he had to leave when he was, I think, 12 years old. But the thing is, they were the tools. Of course, in those days, we weren't arguing about how we could make the tools safe, or how the tools, should be limited, perhaps. I mean, already they were limited, because if you had a well-off family, you certainly didn't have to stop your learning at 11 years old, unless you went to extraordinary lengths. So learning was already limited. I'm just wondering, sorry, I'm waffling a bit, to what extent, if at all, we can compare the two, the ability to read and do simple figure work, and the ability to use the internet. Are they, in both cases, are we looking at opening doors into what could be a terrifying, dangerous place, or is that just too simplistic?
I'm sure there's a strong analogy. We as a species are in some ways evolving all the time in society and technology and so on. We've come quite a long way from primitive use of tools to the most incredibly sophisticated use of tools. It's not clear that moral development has advanced so greatly, because a lot of the most important thing is not just the access to a tool, but the guided use of it. We don't let children just loose in the world. They're given guidance. We talk about guided autonomy for children, and I think we don't want to be indiscriminately releasing technologies on humanity. At the moment we're seeing the most wonderful advances in the creation of weaponry for automated slaughter of people on fronts. So the Ukrainians talk about the Russians throwing troops into the meat grinder, because those troops are defenseless against drones, and the Ukrainians basically have to sit on their border slaughtering Russians, because the Russians won't stop sending troops to be slaughtered in their bid to create a genocide in Ukraine. This has nothing to do with the internet, except, of course, that the internet is used as the medium of communication by both sides in that battlefield. So it's increasing effective use of automated warfare. At the moment, it doesn't appear that, and this is the point, you can find good news and bad news everywhere. There's loads of good news. There's loads of good things to be found and done. But wouldn't it be nice if we were to use more wisdom in deployment of and the making available of technology, not just arguing whether something should be a right or not, but arguing, but discussing. Democracy is okay unless you vote in idiots and dictators. there are now tools for citizens' assemblies so that people can have much more intelligent debates about far more complex issues. And I think that's what we need to be, as Quakers, we should be well focused on introducing these wiser ways of being with each other and discussing, and then using using the technologies in ways that then appear obviously appropriate. So yeah, learning to read, wonderful. Everybody should have that right, but let's read the right books. Not and similarly with the internet, yes, let's have access to the best communication tools, but let's use them to communicate well and not to exploit and destroy.
That's why we have to we have to start with children, and we have to start with governments, and we have to start with many other people who control society today to annex rules and other such things to start to go where we want to go, but to do that we need control over the big tech companies such as X and Facebook and Google and places like that, which, as I said earlier, is the Wild West at the moment. They have to be controlled by people like us who say that we don't want this, we don't want that, we want you to do this. And until we do that, until we start to actually, as companies, demand that these things happen, it will continue on that way, because they can make money out of people doing, as you know, the clickbait type of stuff, which makes lots of companies lots of money. We need to start to have moral, ethical standards, which are what we are, because as Quakers, I think we have moral, ethical, and honest standards, and these are the type of stuff we need to continue to push towards, because there are going to be a lot of people out there who make enormous amounts of money who don't want this to happen. The greed is one of the big things, that the people who own all these technologies and own the newspapers. Can you tell me of one person who actually lives in the United Kingdom who owns a national newspaper? Nope. The man who owns the Daily Mail lives in Monaco. The man who owns the Times and the Sun lives in America. The people who own the Telegraph, I think that's Mr. Two Beards, isn't it, who, as Private Eye call him. And the Eye is owned by Russians. So that is the technology that we need to have a moral and standard thing. Far, far, far away over there. But it doesn't mean we can't not do something about it.
Who owns the Guardian?
The Guardian is owned by the something trust. Yes, that is owned Scott Trust.
Yeah.
That is England. Yes, apologies, Patsy. There is one.
That's a relief. Sorry.
Angela.
Isn't the Observer also not foreign owned?
Sorry?
The Observer is the other. The Observer, the Sunday Observer.
Yes. No, that is going to be owned now by Tortoise,
Yeah.
who's from America.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah.
I like to keep up with me newspapers who own some and who things, because the people for a while who owned the Telegraph were the Barclay brothers, who were on the island of Baku, who were very strange people. And it's now been shown that they don't have millions, that the money just kept going around in some virtuous circle of borrowing here, there, in other places, that they own banks and all this lot. But there you go. It's it's a we need to make moral, ethical, social standards of where we want, as human beings, where we want all these things to go to. We need to educate our children a lot better. I think everybody agrees with that. The difference between, if you are a wealthy person, you can send your children to private schools and to boarding schools, which is another thing which makes me jump up and down and stamp, do things like that, because most of them are horrendous. But these are the things; these are the core things we need to get right to go forward. I think so.
There's an interesting book that when my then husband and I left New York when I was pregnant, my daughter Kyla was born in 1965. So next year I'm going to have a daughter who's 60 years old. A very good friend of ours who was Native American gave us a copy of Gilbane's The Prophet. It's very, very interesting. And I think sometimes our children can often, that's the claim he makes, our children are not our children, they are life's longing for itself. That maybe it's our children, the hope maybe is with our children. Maybe this is just a thought. This is just a thought.
Right. Well, that was fun, wasn't it?
Thank you very much, Ray. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
We have the Hattie returned.
Oh, I've been listening all along. Angela, you said our children are not our children, they are
life's longing for itself. You're muted, Angela.
No, if you read it, I got up to try and find the copy that my then husband and I were given when we came back from New York to, we made the decision that we would have our children in the UK because we got family and cousins. And we were given Gilbane's
what was
The Prophet.
Name?
The Prophet. And it's
Gil. Oh, right.
You know
I couldn't.
You know it.
Yes, I do.
And
I do.
Yeah, what he says about children is very profound, very profound. And that's what I got up to find a pertinent quote that I thought was relevant. And then I couldn't find it. So I sat down and started coughing. So my apologies.
Children are not our children, but searching for life.
No, they are something of life's longing for itself.
Yeah.
You can, it's basically our children, we don't own our children's minds, but it's said in such a profound and interesting way. That's a thought I had, when we were debating.
Okay. Yeah, and I would love if our council would have a moral guidance on that when they're passing policies and things, to consider children first, consider the next generation.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's another issue, but I was a head teacher of an infant and nursery school in Hackney, and I was just thinking of the support that I had. You know, if there was a child that we thought had bruising on them, the class teacher would stop the lesson for a minute and say, I think Miss Orsa likes to see all the lovely work you're doing on apparatus. So a runner would come up to my office, I would run down and say the teacher was Hilary. She would sort of, with her eyes, say, you know, that's the one I'm worried about. And so I would stand by where that child was working and praise them and praise them and praise them. And then I'd go straight upstairs. And we had a contact who was a social worker and say, I really do think, you know, little Tommy's got bruises on his body. I think this needs following up. We were in loco parentis in a very real sense. Our responsibility was to make sure that children were growing up. And then, of course, as I came in, that margarine queen cow bitch buggered it all up. Not a nice note to end up with, but one I feel passionate about.
Yes.
That's another issue I don't know about. Okay.
Having worked with children, having worked a lot with children in that way also, I fully agree with your points, Angel. Right.
And internet access ideas.
They're there. We have to do something about them. Or do we?
Thank you for all your contributions to that. That's really good thinking. I was in the practicalities of life.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ray.
So then, folks, I think we can leave it there. Still going, excuse me. But there you go. The next time we meet, he says, struggling with his bits of paper.
January the 10th.
January the 10th.
Thanks.
And it's Martin Smith. How do we treat our children?
Oh, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful.
How's about that for synchronicity? Or some words like that. Anyway, they votes. And have a good Christmas and New Year. And I hope to see you all afterwards.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.